It's nice to be back in St. Gallen. It's actually been, Ambassador Ischinger was asking me when's the last time I'd been here. It was in 2000, and it feels like yesterday. And I'm glad to see that it's grown in stature and in profile. I'm just a simple guy from California is what I'd like to say. I'm a financial journalist, been doing it for 25 years. So why am I chairing a panel on nuclear risk? I think it kind of sums up where we stand today in terms of how we rate the different risks around the world. We've gone through an incredible wave of a financial shock over the last 4 years, in particular, of course, going back to 2008. And it's a fair statement to say that one might be reaching that point of risk saturation. We have the debt crisis hangover in the United States and Europe, of course. There's the oil prices that remain stubbornly high, in part because of the risk we're going to talk about this morning, above $100 a barrel. There's always that constant risk of a terrorist attack, a cybersecurity attack, and all these top the list of different risk surveys that you all read. But clearly, nuclear weapon development and testing takes the world in a whole new atmosphere or dimension of risk, a new frontier. And with the rise of economic might, it's not by accident that some would desire to mark their prowess in this sort of arena. India, then of course neighboring Pakistan does attest. Or in the case of Iran and North Korea, perhaps represents a need to display authority. Is that what's really behind what we're seeing today? So our objective here is to size up global risk linked to the nuclear threat. Now, I host the emerging market program called Global Exchange, which we launched 6 months ago out of Abu Dhabi to look at the tilt to the east, and something that the former finance minister was talking about, the growth from China to the Middle East and to Southeast Asia, represented by Indonesia here with the Minister of Trade, and the implications of that, even the growth in Africa. But the other program I host is Marketplace Middle East, and have been doing so for the last 5 years. And having moved to Abu Dhabi in the last 8 months, one is very evident of the nuclear threat. It's right in your neighborhood, and I take it much more seriously than I did having lived in London for the previous 8 years, particularly with the children of 6 and 9. So when I used the Google map before, and I would hone in on the Straits of Hormuz, that strait looked nice and wide on the Google map when you sit in London. When you live in Abu Dhabi and you put the Google map in, you put the Strait of Hormuz, it looks like this. Hence the fears that they have in the region right now, hence the escalation in the military budgets that we see today. Our timing for this topic is ideal. In a sense, it comes up right before the talks that are going to resume here in Vienna, and then we know the next benchmark date for Mr. Amano, of course, is May 23rd in Iraq. We had the talks recently in Turkey. What sort of progress have we really made? That's what we want to talk about this morning. We have a phenomenal panel to address the nuclear threat. Mr. Yukiya Amano is the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, of course, the IAEA. He's, by his left, is joined by Professor Pervez Hoodbhoy, the visiting professor of the School of Science and Engineering at LUMS in Lahore. And Ambassador Wolfgang Ischinger, of course, is the chairman of the Munich Security Conference, but very well known for his work in arms control and negotiations, and of course served as the ambassador to the United States and to the United Kingdom for Germany. We have an hour together. I like to always leave at least 15, 20 minutes for question and answer from the floor, so we'll make a point to do so. And we'll ask our different panelists to give their opening statements, and I'll push that forward into a round table, and then we'll open it up to the floor. It's my understanding we have an opening question for you to vote on to get the kind of sense of the audience before we get started. If we can call that, that question up. And you know how the rules are played here in the second day of the symposium. You can vote by text or go online, and this debate is also on the record and is being streamed at the same time. Is it a nation's right to hold nuclear arms? Fairly straightforward question, but it has grand implications. Is it the nation's right to hold nuclear arms? We'll leave that voting box up and open, and you can see the voting box change as people weigh in, 75 to 25% now, but it'll be interesting to see as our discussion progresses where we go. I think it's only right, Director General, to have you give us a sense of where we're going. And as Ambassador Ischinger and I walked in this morning, it's one of the key questions that's always in my mind. Do we really know where we're going with Iran? Maybe you can answer this in your opening comments. As a collective body, with all the different players, the P5+1 and all the members of the IAEA, IAEA, do we know where we want to go at the end of this path of negotiations? Why don't you take it from there, and then I'll ask the distinguished guest to also weigh in with their opening comments. Please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I feel very much honored to be invited to this meeting. This is the first time I attend this. Nuclear technology is a very useful one. It can produce electricity if countries would like to do so, and it is very helpful to control cancer, manage water, and produce food. However, it accompanies risks. One of the risks is the proliferation of nuclear weapons. Let me explain a very basic thing. In order to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons, the world has a treaty called Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT. Under this NPT, 5 countries, United States, France, United Kingdom, Russia, and China, are recognized as nuclear weapon states, while they have the obligation on negotiating for the nuclear disarmament. Other countries joined NPT as non-nuclear weapon states and have the obligation not to have developed nuclear weapons. Because of this, those countries that joined NPT as non-nuclear weapon states have the obligation to conclude a so-called safeguard agreement with the IAEA. The idea is that they declare that they do not have any nuclear weapons or military activities, and IAEA sends inspectors to check it. This is called safeguard agreement. We have a couple of problems. Most of the countries honor their commitment, and we can give the clean bill of health. But a number of countries have problems. One is Iran. Iran is a non-nuclear weapon state and has concluded comprehensive safeguard agreement with the IAEA. We have the inspectors, they have declared facilities, and as far as those facilities that they have declared, we can provide assurance that the material and facility stay in peaceful purpose. But there is a long history of concealment by Iran. In 2003, the Board of Governors of the IAEA policy organization, policy-making body of the IAEA decided that Iran is non-compliance with the IAEA obligations. Since that time, a number of UN Security Council resolutions are adopted. I joined the IAEA in 2009, and I have been working on one standard. That is that all the countries have to implement the safeguard agreement and other relevant obligations. In this regard, I can say declared activities and material of Iran are staying in peaceful purposes, but as the level of cooperation from Iran is not sufficient, I cannot give the assurance that there is no undeclared facilities and all the activities are in peaceful purpose. I cannot give that assurance. This is the problem now. Then, what will be the future? It is very simple for me. The key is that Iran will provide us proactive cooperation and implement all the obligations, which include the safeguard agreement and relevant United Nations resolutions, which are legally binding. Let me very briefly touch on another issue of DPRK. Seeing from Europe, Iran is the most important serious issue. I come from Japan, and seeing from Asia, North Korea is also a very serious problem. It can be worse, because North Korea declared to have withdrawn from the NPT, expelled all the IAEA inspectors, and detonated nuclear weapons. And now the world is worrying there will be another test of nuclear weapons. If there is a good news or positive aspect, we have the six-party talk related to North Korea, a framework of dialogue. I hope that there would be progress through this framework of dialogue. Coming back to Iran, there was a very important meeting between P5+1 and Iran. I was reported that it was a very good meeting. And there will be another meeting in Baghdad between P5+1, Germany, and Iran on 23rd of May. IAEA is also having a dialogue with Iran, and we are going to have a meeting in Vienna on the 14th and 15th of May. I hope that next time we can produce concrete result. My final point is that proliferation of nuclear weapons is a great risk. There is another risk, that is that nuclear material and radioactive material falling into the hands of terrorists. This is called nuclear security. And we'll discuss the issue of Pakistan, and some people worry that nuclear material may fall into the hands of terrorists in Pakistan, for example. I can assure you that Pakistan is cooperating with us very positively, actively. We train people from Pakistan. We provide nuclear detection equipment, but more needs to be done. Pakistan is not an exception. There are many other countries who need to do more, and global effort is needed to address this global threat of nuclear security. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have a series of questions to follow up on some of the points that you brought up. There's been quite a healthy debate of how to create almost a common market for nuclear products, right? And to measure and trace these things, almost like blood diamonds, but we can get into that a little bit later. Professor, do you want to take it from here? It's worth noting to our audience, if you're not familiar with the professor's work, he's a prolific writer. In fact, I saw him on his laptop there writing away. But has also raised a number of eyebrows back home in Pakistan for the stance you have taken quite vocally on the path that Pakistan has been pursuing in terms of its recent test. Do you want to pick it up from there?
Well, thank you. First, let me address the question that's been posed before all of us. My answer is absolutely not. No country in the world has the right to bear nuclear arms. Nuclear weapons are immoral. They should be delegitimized. They should be abolished the world over. I'm proud to have studied under those who made the world's first atomic bomb. I'm also proud to share with them their revulsion against nuclear weapons after they were first used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. For the last 30 years, I have been trying to persuade the military leaders in my country and the political leaders to not enter into the nuclear race, to give up nuclear weapons, in spite of the fact that India initiated the arms race on the subcontinent. It has been futile because today, as probably many of you know, Pakistan has the world's fastest growing nuclear arsenal. It has maybe 120 nuclear warheads. There is a uranium enrichment facility at Kahuta where the first material was prepared, and the centrifuges are going, well, at full speed, and there might be other facilities as well. But in addition to that, there are now 2 functioning plutonium-producing reactors at Khushab. A third is about to be completed, and a 4th one is under construction. None of these reactors have any utility for the production of electrical power. They are dedicated for the bomb. When it comes to the matter of fissile material cutoff, my country opposes that at the Conference of Disarmament in Geneva, as a consequence of which the CD has pretty much folded up. My government does not deny that it is producing fissile material at an ever-increasing rate, but it says that it has no option because the United States and India entered into a nuclear deal And this was in spite of India having illegally and surreptitiously having made nuclear weapons, which it tested on the 11th of May 1998. Pakistan followed 17 days later. It says that, and rightly so, that India has now a much enhanced capacity for making nuclear material, fissile material, by virtue of the fact that it can now get nuclear fuel, it can get nuclear supplies from the United States, from Australia, and from other countries. And so they say that it is our national security which forces us to go in this direction. I think this is indeed part of the reason. This is another reason why Pakistan is so furiously making bombs. And that has not all that much to do with India. It has a lot to do with the United States. Because relations between Pakistan and the United States have changed dramatically. We are formally allied to the US, and we are formally NATO's ally. And yet, as you know, NATO supplies have been blocked in Pakistan. As things change in Afghanistan, this is going to get hotter. But how does this impact upon the nuclear issue? It's because it is now in the minds of our military leaders, in the minds of ordinary people as well, that the United States is out to capture and destroy Pakistan's nuclear weapons. So if there are more of them, and if they are better hidden, and if they are dispersed, well, then we have a better chance of saving our nukes from a type of Osama bin Laden type operation. And so therefore, redundancy, I think, is driving this desire to maximize the number of nuclear weapons. I must say that in this whole process, India has not been helpful at all. Just recently, it tested a 5,000-kilometer range ICBM. It could go up till 8,000 kilometers, as the Chinese say. And India has been consistently driving and baiting Pakistan to, in fact, catch up on its defense. Now, very quickly, I know we have very limited time. Let me put Pakistan and Iran in this picture. Yes, it is true that Dr. A.Q. Khan, who I happen to know rather well, did supply centrifuges to Iran. They were P1s, he says, and they were old, and that was junk material, so he doesn't see anything wrong with that. But Pakistan is not interested in helping Iran anymore. We have a serious conflict. That conflict is basically Shia versus Sunni. And now, as Iran inches towards making nuclear weapons, or rather, I should say, arriving at the capacity to make nuclear weapons, there are interesting future scenarios. Well, certainly Pakistan will not want Iran to have nuclear weapons, particularly because Pakistan's real ally in the Middle East is Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia hates Iran. So should Iran actually develop nuclear weapons, there will then come a question before Pakistan what to do. Because Saudi Arabia does not have the capacity to make nuclear weapons, it does not have the technical expertise, and it will turn, by default, to Pakistan. And this is something that a lot of people in Pakistan, a lot of people I know in the Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission would like to do. It's natural. They are Sunni, they are Pakistan's natural allies in the Middle East. And that is a complication that might come in the future. One last point before I end. As I told you, I want every country in the world to give up nuclear weapons. I do not want Iran to have nukes. I don't even know if Iran is actually on the point of making nuclear weapons, but I'm fairly convinced that there's something around, because if it was just nuclear electricity, well, look, it's got a lot of gas, and we want to buy that gas. It didn't have to incur all these penalties if all it wanted was nuclear electricity. But Iran would be the 10th nuclear state if it actually made that bomb. There are 9 others, and all of them acquired these weapons wrongly, illegitimately, because there is no morality to having a nuclear weapon for any country. Do you want to bomb the 10th country? The 9 others are okay? That's a moral problem. That's a serious problem. And I would say that if the United States does it, if NATO goes along with it, if Europe goes along with it, we are in for an interminable conflict between Islam and the West for all times to come, at least as far as I can see. Don't do it. Don't even think of doing it. Thank you.
Before I turn to Ambassador Ischinger, I think it would be interesting to get your thoughts on the latest test of the Agni 5 by India. In your view, was it targeted to China, or was it equally targeted at Pakistan in terms of might and future prowess in this sort of space, do you think?
Agni 5 is overkill for Pakistan. It's got 5,000, maybe 8,000 kilometer range. And the earlier versions of the Agni, and in fact of the Prithvi is only about 300 kilometers. Well, that's good enough. Look, Pakistan is, maybe something like 500 kilometers in breadth at the most. And yes, of course, there's an advantage to stationing missiles further away from the border. But 5,000 kilometers is overkill. It's actually the Chinese who are worried. And the Chinese have been saying that actually the missile range is 8,000 kilometers because they want to get you guys worried on this.
Thank you very much. Ambassador, you're an expert at long-term security negotiations. I'm not sure where you'd like to start. I think one of the key questions is, I think people ask, as we had that last meeting in Istanbul, the next one in Vienna, and the following one taking place in Baghdad, do we know where we want to go as a world in these talks with Iran? You've sat down in some of these most sensitive negotiations in the past. Is there a fairly clear line of sight what the long-term objective is, or the Iranians running the world here in circles at this juncture?
Well, first of all, I find it very hard to disagree with anything that either Director General Amano or Professor Hoodbhoy have just said. I find myself in essentially full agreement. I'll come back to your question. Let me start with a general comment. I find it not surprising a bit that both gentlemen speak about an issue which I suppose in our minds is the number one, or if not the number one of the number one security challenges in the 21st century. In my view, nuclear security is the number one security challenge in the world. And if you have followed the trajectory of people like Dr. Henry Kissinger or George Shultz or Sam Nunn or any other number of other leaders, including Helmut Schmidt and others on the German and European side, there is among the expert community a far-reaching emerging consensus that this is the number one security challenge. I'm not sure that you, either as students or CEOs or executives or business people, share that sense of priority. At the Munich Security Conference, I invited a group of German CEOs for a luncheon discussion, about a dozen, very senior people. One or two may actually be in the room, I don't know. Within literally just a few minutes, the idea was to discuss security, as we do in Munich. Within just a few minutes, we talked about internet security. How can companies protect themselves against all these well-known or not so well-known risks in the internet. Nuclear security, as Director Amano explained it, wasn't, in my understanding, really on the radar screen of any of these very important senior CEOs. I want this audience to understand that this is the #1 challenge and it must be dealt with. One way of doing it is, of course, by trying to strengthen the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Regime, which, for which the organization in Vienna holds important responsibility, but Director General Amano can't do it himself. He needs support from the international community at large. So I think there is a bit of a disconnect here. We know how important it is, but it has not been really something that has grabbed the attention of the broader public. Now, finally, as far as the Iran situation is concerned, let me make 2 brief points. First of all, I think one of the most counterproductive, I hate to say useless, one of the most counterproductive things I've seen recently in terms of international diplomacy has been, you know, the megaphone announcements both from Israel and from certain quarters in the US about the, you know, imminent strike against Iran. I will add in parentheses, if you want to strike a country in this way, you don't usually announce it publicly 3 months in advance. That's, from a military point of view, not a sound approach. From a political strategic point of view, it is not a good idea, and I share Professor Hoodbhoy's view that it would be a disastrous decision to go down that road. Do we have an alternative? Yes, I believe we do. I think that our negotiators have found themselves at the recent meeting in Istanbul in a slightly more promising atmosphere. Now, as a diplomat, as a practitioner of diplomacy, I don't trust atmospherics that much. It will be important whether in Baghdad at the next session something concrete is going to be put on the table or not. We don't know that. But the impression we're getting is that somehow, you know, there appears to be a new opportunity. And as a diplomat, of course, I believe in diplomatic opportunities. I don't like military force as a diplomatic option at all. And in that sense, I think we are on the right track. And it is up to you to have a judgment whether the sanctions which we applied in the case of Iran are doing their job, or whether there are other factors and elements that may hopefully bring about a more fruitful series of discussions and negotiations. But, final point, even in my view, even if Iran were to go down the unfortunate road toward a nuclear military capability, in disregard of obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, even then, I don't think that there is a reason for a military confrontation. Even then, I think there are ways to deal with such a situation. I don't think that there is no option to military escalation in that particular case. And I don't agree with President Obama when he said that there can be no containment. I think we actually have containment. And containment worked in the Cold War. It's not a good idea. It's always only the second or third best. But before you go to war, as the professor said, ending up with an endless confrontation between the West and Islam as a possible consequence, I think we should seriously consider all alternatives in a very serious way. Thanks, John.
Thank you. So just for planning purposes, we have about a half hour left. I'd like to do 15 minutes of questions and then invite 15 minutes of questions from the floor. You all brought up phenomenal points that do need some following up. If I can, Ambassador, the role of Russia in these talks sitting around the table now, it took a very bold and isolationist view of Syria, which left it very exposed. Because of what's transpired in Syria, and Russia doesn't want to be isolated yet again, around the table is Russia seeing this very differently with Iran? And how crucial is Russia's position on trying to sway Iran to a different path?
My fellow German diplomat, Ambassador Peter Gottwald, is here, and he held direct responsibility for this issue until he went to Bern not so long ago. Hello, Peter. You know, I think the German point among the P5+1 has always been, for the last 4, 5, 6 years or so, that the most important thing is for us to keep the permanent five together. It makes no sense for the EU to go this alone. In other words, having Russia and China on board was, from our point of view, a key strategic prerequisite. Russia, fortunately, as I understand it from talking to some of the negotiators who were in Istanbul, Russia is on board. Russia shares our view that we must dissuade, if that is possible, Iran from continuing this, and we must explain to Iran the advantages for Iran of complying with the IAEA agenda. Final point. If Russia's support in this effort is so important to us strategically, why are we so foolish to challenge Russia on ballistic missile defense at exactly that same moment? Some of you may have seen that yesterday the senior-most Russian general challenged the West, challenged NATO in a very serious way. I don't think we can afford a deterioration of the relationship between NATO and Russia over ballistic missile defense at a time when we need Russia fully on board on Iran.
Thank you very much. Director General Amano, I don't think we can overlook the domestic motivations in Iran. If you read carefully, and I obviously do because I live in the neighborhood now, the tensions between the supreme leader of Iran and the president of Iran, there was an op-ed in Al-Riyadh of Saudi Arabia suggesting that Iran is trying to export its domestic issues outside through the use of the nuclear development program. How do you see this manifesting itself? Is this a domestic power struggle with Iran that's making the job of the IAEA almost untenable because we have a domestic squabble and this is the best way to export huge economic challenges from Iran as well and distract attention?
Certainly, it should not be that easy for Iran to make a decision. But what is very important for us is that the Supreme Leader said that Iran uses nuclear technology and material only for peaceful purpose. And if that is the case, Iran needs to make a decision to engage with us to clarify the issue. And every country has difficulties, but Iran cooperating with the IAEA, clarifying the ambiguous activities should be the interest of Iran.
Great. Professor, you want to weigh in on this and your view of the internal power struggle of Iran and how this is impacting what we're likely to see in Istanbul as well. Do they really want a deal? Or do they need an external enemy because the internal power struggle is quite intense in Iran?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. Ahmadinejad is not a popular president in Iran. He is faced with huge economic difficulties. He once had popularity, but that is diminishing. So in such a situation, you use the nuclear nationalism card, and it always works. It happened with Indira Gandhi in 1974 when India first tested. She was at a dip in her popularity, and suddenly the graph went up. You've seen it happen in other countries again and again. So he's using that. On the other hand, Iran is paying a huge penalty. The inflation over there, according to my Iranian friends, is unbearable now. But still, no country can be starved because the issue of national honor comes up. And so there is only, I think we've reached the point of diminishing returns on sanctions. Iran will do what it's going to do, irrespective of the sanctions.
They would continue to pursue the weapon, even though the pain at home is very great.
Yes, essentially, yes. They cannot afford to say we are giving up nuclear weapons because we've been squeezed so hard. It's a culture of honor, and cultures of honor cannot be defeated in this manner. Of course, Japan was another matter. That was Hiroshima. You completely cracked the Japanese there. But short of that, when you get national hackles up, how do you bring them down?
Going back to Ambassador Issinger's point, there was a piece by Matthew Kronig in the Foreign Affairs magazine very recently, and I'll quote from him, suggesting that an attack by Israel on Iran could spare the world of a real threat. This is the other camp that you were talking about here. So I'll repeat the quote. An attack by Israel on Iran could spare the world of a real threat. The philosophy being, why don't we take preemptive action before we let this move forward? This makes it extremely tricky for the Director General here. Ambassador, do you want to weigh in? Do you have any idea whether this is still the prevailing view in America, Director General?
Let me be clear about my understanding of the situation in Iran and my report.
I'm asking, sorry, I don't mean to be rude. I'm asking a different question. Yeah. There's a whole camp in America that believes a preemptive strike by Israel is a good thing.
The atmosphere is changing. I myself am firmly against the use of force, and IAEA is working to solve the issue through dialogue. And P5+1 is now working for that. And there are ups and downs, but in my reading, the pursuit of or the desire to solve this Iranian issue through dialogue is stronger now than before.
Good. Ambassador, I'd like to have you weigh in on something I know it sounds very simplistic, but it was the body language. And in fact, when I was hosting Global Exchange during the visit of Prime Minister Netanyahu to Washington, I could see out of the corner of my eye the body language before we took the live bilateral meeting within the Oval Office. And the language that Prime Minister Netanyahu was using to say we respect or keep our right to protect our people for security purposes. And the response that you could see in the body language from President Obama was quite extraordinary. Is Israel in an election year boxing in President Obama in this sense and pursuing something that perhaps is not even that popular back home in Israel, putting that much pressure on America during an election year in both countries?
Well, first of all, I mean, this quote which you just read, I would turn it around. I'd say if a strike, a preemptive strike by Israel or by anybody else against Iran will almost certainly create a new threat. And it will not make this kind of threat that we discussed, the possible Iranian threat, go away, certainly not permanently. You're not going to...
Iran would not go back into its box if it got hit.
You're not going to bomb Iran back into the Stone Age, are you? This is a country with a 5,000-year history and very smart people and a very young population, which is one additional reason why using preemptive, I mean, regardless, let's leave the question of international law aside for a moment, but that is certainly yet another serious complicating factor. So I think it is a foolish idea, and you could turn it really around. I find it important to note that the debate in Israel, to the extent that I can follow it, is not at all a debate that falls completely in line with what the current Israeli government appears to have said. There are serious voices in Israel, including from the military, including from the intelligence community, who share the view and express it publicly that there is not yet a decision in Tehran to produce a weapon. Now, I don't know, I'm not privy to the intelligence information, but I find it interesting that these views are expressed by serious people in Israel, that the US intelligence community has promoted this view is also important to note. In other words, I don't think, from all the information that we have, I don't think that we are at the brink of an Iranian nuclear weapons capability. I think there is time for more negotiations, and we should certainly use this time. Now, final point. You're not going to be successful, and I know a little bit what I'm talking about because I've been involved in, over the decades, in a lot of diplomatic negotiations. The worst recipe for diplomatic success is to ask your opponent for full and unconditional surrender. He will only do that if you invade him and if you kill the leadership and everybody else. Okay? In other words, let's figure out a way for the Ahmadinejad government, even if we don't like them, to save face. Let's allow them to go home and say, we got something out of this. We got the assurance from the international community that we have the right to have a non-military use of, nuclear energy, which is their right. But it has been questioned, and their use of the nuclear material. So I think there is a possible deal where Iran could obtain some assurances and some promises, and where maybe in a step-by-step deal, if Iran does this, maybe we will lift some of the sanctions. Footnote, hard to do in an election year. So don't expect too much in 2012. Washington, as I understand it, is not going to be capable of a lot of creative diplomacy as we move into the hot phase of the presidential elections. So my hope is for some, Wassertreten, for some holding operation, and I believe that if there is going to be a real opportunity, it will be in 2013.
Okay, thanks. Professor, I have a follow-up, and I know you're going to make us some comments as well. Pakistan fits into the category of the next 11, according to Goldman Sachs. 11 countries kind of after the BRICS. Indonesia is a member of that group as well. That has the potential to grow fast. It's a market of 170 million consumers. It sits on India's doorstep, has good trade relations with China, low-cost labor base. It seems extraordinary in the 21st century that we see and watch a government that's only growing less than 4%, that needs to grow 7% to deal with poverty, that's only attracting $5 billion a year of foreign direct investment, spends this much energy and this much funding on military buildup, in particular nuclear weapons. And this doesn't ring true within the administration, any administration that comes into Pakistan, to suggest that removing the security threat, and I just did an interview with the Minister of Commerce this week in Dubai from Pakistan, would unleash a huge amount of economic development and growth for Pakistan. And why is there a disconnect so strongly within the ruling government now?
Well, it's actually even less than 4%. They found that the figures were fudged, so it's probably between 2 and 3%.
From a level, pre-9/11 level of 7. Yeah,
yes.
It's extraordinary.
Well, post 9/11, there was a big boom because the remittances were from Pakistanis working overseas came in as a flood because other means of getting money into Pakistan were blocked off by the Americans, lest they lest it help Al-Qaeda. What could be better than for Pakistan to be friends with India, to open up its borders, to have trade, commerce, have Indians visiting Pakistan, Pakistanis visiting India? Oh, that, to my mind, is nirvana, it is utopia. And I hope, I'm not sure it'll happen in my lifetime, but if it does, I will be thrilled. Why hasn't it happened? I don't think it has to do with the wounds of 1947. They were serious. 1 million people died in partition. But it has more to do with the attitudes of the Pakistani military, which wants a perpetual enemy so that it can keep its position of power and privilege in Pakistani society. Now, if I might, I'd like to add on to what Ambassador Ischinger had said earlier in relation to Iran. I want to go back to 1998, which was when India had just tested, and a few days after that, it was rumored that Israeli jets were circling the potential test site in Chari. And there was a rumor that Pakistani Air Force jets had intercepted the Israeli jet, the F-16s, which then fled. Well, probably rubbish. There's no real reason why Israel would have or could have attacked Pakistan at that time. But suppose it had. Suppose that the United States had decided that it doesn't want Pakistan to have nuclear weapons, so let's go and take out the Kahuta centrifuge facility. They could have done it, of course. What do you think would have happened? It would have been then war. Those nuclear weapons would still have been made, and they would have been made in other places. You cannot take out a country's industrial infrastructure unless you pulverize it to the ground or, as you say, bomb it back to the Stone Age. And yes, Pakistan made the bomb, and I'm very unhappy with it. But look, you learn to live with Pakistan. It's, well, an unhappy situation, but it would have been infinitely worse had Israel or the United States attacked it then. And so now let's carry this discussion to Iran. It'll be the 10th nuclear state. That's the worst case scenario. Can it be managed? And here I would agree with you. Yes, it can be managed. It can be contained. You learn how to do that using diplomacy, using sanctions, whatever. But you don't go and attack it.
Before we open the floor, I have one question for the Director General. Reuters has been pretty accurate with its reporting of North Korea in particular with this topic. And there was this dispatch by Reuters last week suggesting that Kim Jong-un is ready for a third test after the failure of April 13th. How credible is the report in your view?
We do not know well. We do not have the inspector on the ground. We are following the situation carefully, but we do not have a particular knowledge or information. But if a nuclear test takes place in the near future, we'll not be surprised.
Would not be surprised. Okay. If we can raise the lights, please. And we have a number of different questions here. Due to the 15-minute window we have, if we can give one to the gentleman with his hands up. And then there's one person 3 rows back, and then we have one here as well. If we can, do we have more than one microphone? And then we could distribute them right away. We have a hand up here with the lady. It would be good to get a mic. Can you raise your hand again, please? And we'll do in rapid fire if we can. Very short comment and direct it to one on the panel, please.
Sure. Good morning. My name is Ahad. I'm from Pakistan, but I study in Singapore. I have 2 brief questions. The first question is directed to the Director General, Mr. Amano. How do you ensure that the military regime of Pakistan is not playing a double game as they did with the Americans? Because they were training the militants in training camps. It's an open secret. Everyone knows about it. It was revealed in Secret Pakistan, which was documentary aired on BBC World. So how do you ensure that when the IAEA inspectors go and visit the sites, they are not seeing a facade? And my second question is, in case the nuclear arsenal of Pakistan does fall into the hands of the militants, what strategy will the international community take, particularly NATO?
Thanks for being direct. Director General.
We have some facilities of Pakistan under IAEA safeguard. So as far as these facilities are concerned, we can find whether the material and activities are for peaceful purpose or not. But as Pakistan is not a member of the NPT, we don't have the legal authority to go beyond, and we don't have other information. We can assure that facilities under safeguard are peaceful purpose. Other activities, we don't have knowledge.
Professor, do you have a real concern that these weapons in the wrong hands?
It's a black box. What happens in Kahuta at Khushab, places which are outside of the IAEA's ambit, we have absolutely no idea. You cannot monitor these things from the sky. Human intelligence is very limited. If fissile material goes missing, I don't know how this could possibly be known. And so your question, am I worried? Yes, I am. What can I do?
If we can just keep the lights up, yeah? I'll go here and then I'll come here. Yeah, go there first, please.
Thank you. Jelena Petrovic, War Studies, King's College London. Thank you all for very interesting presentations. Now, I would very much appreciate if you could go down from the idealistic discussion of what could have been done and what should be done to what can be done. And I would appreciate your comments about what is West ready to offer Iran to bring up the favorable cost-benefit analysis of why Iran should actually abandon uranium enrichment. For example, is IAEA ready to mediate and provide LEU in return for the moratorium on uranium enrichment? Is US ready to abandon rather than only freeze Arrow 3 program with Israel in return for Iran dismantling all but tactical range and payload missiles? What exactly are you ready to do, not only to ask from Iran? Thank you.
Please.
IAEA is first and foremost a technical organization, and our mission is to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. And for that purpose, we have the responsibility and right to implement fully the safeguard agreement. In case of Iran, we do not say that Iran has nuclear weapons. We don't have any indication. We do not say either that Iran has made a decision to develop nuclear weapons. We don't have that indication. But we have the information that indicates that Iran engaged in activities relevant to the development of nuclear explosive devices. Therefore, we are asking Iran to clarify these issues. Clarifying these issues should be in the interest of Iran because Iran claims that all the activities are for peaceful purposes. And I hope that IAEA can make a huge contribution to provide assurance that all the activities in Iran are peaceful purposes.
Ambassador, you alluded to this briefly in your comments of what could get Iran, what could be given to Iran to get something out of Iran. There's always this discussion in the Middle East about the level of hypocrisy with how the U.S. manages this relationship.
Well, I think you're asking, obviously, a key question, a very important question. But don't expect a good and solid answer for two reasons. First, to my knowledge, there is, at this point, no agreement, no plan within the P5+1 along the lines of what exactly would we be prepared to do if Iran were to announce this and that and that. In other words, the answer to your questions will be found, hopefully, as we move along. There's no premeditated plan. Second point...
Excuse me for a second, Ambassador, but shouldn't there be, that was my kind of opening premise, shouldn't we actually go into this saying, here's our roadmap for negotiation?
Yes, but that's my second point. let's assume we have a secret plan of here is what we will offer to Iran if they go this far, here is what we offer if they abandon the nuclear program totally. Even if we had that plan, I would advocate not announcing it here in St. Gallen today, because there is actually something to be said in favor of confidentiality, even secrecy, in international negotiations. Some of these discussions so far have actually, in my view, suffered from too much pre-announcement. Each time the next round of discussions with Iran is announced, you can see how the enemies of discussions with the West in Iran are positioning themselves. In other words, communicating all of this actually makes a successful discussion under these current circumstances harder than it should be, which is why you're not getting an answer today. I'm sorry.
Excuse me. We have another question here, and I promised a microphone there. And there was a couple in the back that we should try to get a microphone to, and Ambassador, I'd love to get to. Please.
Good morning. My name is Duval. I come from Brazil. And first, I'd like to say that it feels extremely good to be neutral about this whole debate. This is extremely disturbing, even from our perspective. We have nothing to do with this whole talk. Second, I'd like to say that this question is a bit biased, and I'm afraid it was 28% that responded yes, might have changed their mind if the question were, is it any, and I repeat, is it any nation's right to hold nuclear arms? And third, I'd like to make a suggestion to Director Amano that we can get completely rid of this nuclear proliferation treaty. What we need is a nuclear elimination treaty. We're sick and tired of this whole talk of do as I say, not as I do. That's just full of pure hypocrisy. Thank you.
Thank you. If we can get a microphone to the ambassadors, as Ambassador Ischinger was suggesting, you've been involved in these negotiations. Yeah, no, we'll get you a microphone.
Actually, my comment and my question is exactly along the lines of the last speaker. The theme of today's panel is how to deal with the nuclear threat. And in that vein, clearly the NPT, the treaty on which the overarching majority of the international community has already committed itself not to have nuclear weapons, is of course very central. But it is not enough. More needs to be done. And actually, Ambassador Ischinger is part of a global movement called Global Zero, which is advocating exactly that endeavor and that theme. So my question really is to Ambassador Ischinger to point out a bit what Global Zero is doing and what could be done. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me, before you answer, we had a couple of hands back there. I just want to make sure we have that one in the hands with the notebook back there, too. And if we have another one distributed, do we have any hands here? Yeah, one there, too. And then we'll wrap it up, please.
My name is Thomas Weiler, and I have a question to the panel. What makes the panel so sure that a preemptive strike is a bad idea in the case of Syria and Iraq? It turned out to be quite successful, and these nations seem not to have developed their nuclear capacity, while IAEA didn't even notice in the case of Syria that something was going on there. Thank you.
Okay. We'll address that question first. Ambassador, do you want to address the idea of the Global Zero first? Ambassador Ischinger?
Yes, with great pleasure. And I know I need to be brief. The Global Zero movement was proposed and initiated by a group of senior American people who've been involved with nuclear weapons for many years. And this leads me back to my initial comment, how so many nuclear strategists of the Cold War days have now come to the conclusion that the challenge of the 21st century is to get rid of them, not to have them, but to get rid of them. The Global Zero movement tries to promote action on that part of the NPT, which is often forgotten. I mean, it's one part of the NPT to make sure that countries like Iran stick to their obligations and don't, hopefully, develop nuclear capabilities. The other obligation under the NPT is the obligation by the nuclear states, which Director General Amano has listed, to enter into meaningful arms reduction discussions. Actually, disarmament is the goal under the NPT. So far, we've had, as everybody knows, US-Russian, US-Soviet, formerly US-Russian discussions. We've had the New START Treaty recently, but this has been only a bilateral negotiation. Global Zero wishes to work on the vision that as a next step, even more radical reductions between the US and Russia should follow, followed then by more collective reductions, which would hopefully include countries like China, France, UK, and other nuclear weapon states. Is it possible to imagine the final step that everybody, abandons his last nuclear weapon, trusting that all the others do the same? It's a tough question. And my proposal to you, as you think about it, is let's cross that bridge when we reach it. But let's work on reductions, on major and significant reductions first. John, give me 30 more seconds. Are you aware of the fact that even in the spring of 2012, 20 years after the demise of the Soviet Union, warning time for ICBMs between the US and Russia is not significantly longer today than it was in the days of the Cold War. We still live under a huge mutual nuclear threat. We still have not really started to dismantle the centerpieces of the Cold War nuclear arsenal. That's the task, and that is what Global Zero is all about.
Great, thank you. Do you want to answer the question that we had here about the preemptive strikes on Iraq and Syria? Didn't want to overlook the question. If it in fact has worked in the past, why wouldn't it work this time around?
Absolutely. I think here there is a fundamental confusion that has to be addressed. Syria and Iraq are as different as chalk is from cheese relative to Iran. Iran is a country that is sophisticated culturally and technologically, and in terms of education. It has now invested in nuclear energy for something like 3 decades. There was a plan sponsored by the United States for Iran to generate huge amounts of nuclear electricity. And this was at the time of the Shah of Iran. I know that when I was a graduate student at MIT, there was a major discussion within the faculty over there because Iranian students were being sent to MIT's nuclear engineering department, and by the suggestion of the State Department of the United States, they were not to have the same admission requirements, which were pretty tough for MIT, still are. And so the faculty actually eventually reacted to that, and it stopped giving those special privileges. The United States helped Iran create its nuclear program, and that program then went into decline at the time of the war with Iraq. But now it's back. To say that it's all the Middle East is perhaps the most profound mistake that is made in Europe and the United States. They're totally different societies. Iran versus the Arabs. I don't know how many of you know that Darwinian evolution is taught in Iran. I don't know if it's taught in Kansas anymore. But I've looked at those books. I can read a bit of Farsi. They teach Darwinian evolution. And this was actually a debate even at the time of Ayatollah Khomeini. Can you teach science the way science should be taught, or does there have to be a special Islamic science? And Khomeini, whatever else he was, he says mathematics doesn't have a religion. You look at the rest of the Arab world, it's like my country, Pakistan. When I go to Iran, I feel I don't feel I'm in the neighborhood.
Right. We had one question here, and that'll be our last question, just because of time. I apologize for the others who had their hand. We have a microphone here for the lady. Sorry about that. And I apologize in advance. We just tied on time. We got to some very in-depth questions.
Thank you. Salvador Hilme from the Free University of Berlin. My question is directed to Ambassador Ischinger. I just wanted to ask you if you can actually comment on the coherence of transatlantic foreign policy strategy towards North Korea, particularly with the recent leadership changes in Pyongyang. And second question is there really a coherent transatlantic foreign policy strategy, particularly with the rise of China and regional stability in the Asia-Pacific?
Mm-hmm. Not simple ones. Those are for you, though. Yeah. You can point to me, but I'll stick to business.
Very briefly, on the first part of your question on North Korea, well, let me be frank. The North Korean issue, as important as it is in terms of global security and non-proliferation, the effort is led and is conducted through the six-party talks. And Europe, the EU, or the components of the EU do not play a key role in that process. We support the process. We are, of course, interested in helping to assure the abandonment of the nuclear program by North Korea, but we are not really an active player. Second part of your question on China. Let me echo a concern which I heard expressed at some point by Dr. Henry Kissinger a while ago. I think that as you look at the United States and in an election year discussing China, there is a kind of a risk of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Some, and I'm not going to name any names, but some of the people who speak about foreign policy in the United States deal with China as if it had already been decided that there will be an eternal military rivalry between the United States and China. Is that necessary? Would it not be better for the West to approach China in a way that would convince China that they do not need to raise their military budget by 9%, which is, I think, what they did last year. One of the few countries in the world that went upward. In other words, I think the European view is that partnership with China is possible, should be possible, and we should conduct our own approach to China in a way which makes it easy for the Chinese leadership, which is, as we know, in a phase of transition this year, which should make it easy for the Chinese leadership not to regard its own relationship with the West as an emerging military and security rivalry. I think there's risk and opportunity side by side.
Great. Thank you very, very much. I want to thank everybody on the audience for the questions, very deep questions. I would invite you to perhaps approach those who didn't get their questions answered, the three individual members of our panel, Ambassador Ischinger, Professor Hoodbhoy, and Director General Amano. A nice round of applause for addressing everything we put forward.